Good morning, Heidi and Mikalee. I am so excited to have you on the Hope Hub platform. What you do with your business, First40, is incredibly relevant to the members of this community. Just as a reminder, Hope Hub is an online platform for widows where people can connect with each other, attend support groups, support each other, answer questions, and also meet really incredible professionals like Heidi and Mikalee to learn about things that they need to know in their journey through widowhood, which there are a million things we need to know. And also on the platform, you can find resources and really great events. I also just announced my third retreat, which will be happening the first weekend in May. So, really excited about that. But let's talk a little bit more with Heidi and Mikalee about what they do. They will go into more detail, but they run a company called First40 and they help with end of life planning. And they do it in a way that's not so serious, very mindful. And Heidi said to me just before we got on this call that they actually make it fun. And so, for many of us, we struggle with perhaps not doing the end of life planning before our spouses died, or if we did it, maybe not doing it as well as we'd like to. And it then raises the question of what should we be doing for ourselves and our families and our children? And so Heidi and Mickley can talk a lot about that. And so I will turn it over to them. And I'll just let them introduce them. I will let you introduce yourself. Sorry, I'm talking in like another person. I will let you introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your story and why you do what you do.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. And I just want to start by saying, like, that is so completely normal that we've heard this from other widows as well, that oftentimes they did get caught a little bit off guard when they lost their spouse. But now we're hoping to help them feel empowered to, yeah, do things differently now as they think about their own legacy. So my name is Heidi. I actually got into this business because I started in the financial industry. So I spent 21 years in the financial industry, loved the work. But in the last year or so that I was in that business, I was also serving as a caregiver, first for my mother and then for my father as they both faced cancer. And the blessing and burden of that is I got to have amazing time with them and I got to spend that quality time as they were navigating cancer. But really, it still didn't quite feel like I had everything all buttoned up like I wish that I had. So my mom had passed away from lung cancer in 2019. She was hospitalized in September, passed away 4 months later. And then I was helping my dad through COVID, and he got diagnosed with blood cancer in 2021. And unlike my mom's cancer, with my dad's, we felt like we had plenty of time because it was treatable but not curable. He still drove himself to Bible studies and to community events, and everything seemed fine. And it was relatively until it wasn't. And then in January of 23, he was hospitalized with sepsis, and we went in this fast track through the next 4 months before we finally lost him. And at that time, I was feeling like I was going through really two separate scavenger hunts. First one was trying to find care for him because I live in Northern California. He lived in Reno, Nevada. We're separated by a huge mountain range, and I literally could not get to him in the middle of winter sometimes. So he lived alone. I'm trying to find caregivers to supplement his care. I was trying to find people to give him rides because he couldn't drive. And so I just scrambled. And in hindsight, like, of course, when he was diagnosed in 21, we could have come up with plans for all of this, but we just kept thinking, like, we've got time. And then when he finally passed away, I went through the second scavenger hunt, which was cleaning out my childhood home. And that had 50 years worth of memorabilia from both of my parents, their parents, and their grandparents to go through. And I just couldn't believe that I had missed so many things. Like, even being in the financial industry, I missed the story behind jewelry I found in the safe deposit box. I missed the names of the people in the photo albums. And so I started to bemoan all of this to my best friend, Mikalee. And I said, man, like, how did I miss all of this? And so we had started to dream about, like, could we create a guide? Which then brought up that her situation is completely different and yet also equally important when you think about end of life planning.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, from my perspective, I think my brain just works a little bit differently. Heidi had been in the financial industry for 21 years. I'm from a marketing background. My last position before leaning into entrepreneurialism was as the chief marketing officer for the state of Nevada's travel and tourism division, which is kind of a big deal here. So I come at it from this totally different perspective, and I'm talking to Heidi through this, watching her heartbreak. And also thinking this is something and it's meaningful. And she has such fire and passion for helping people not do what she had done. And so, kind of, together we joined forces. And as she mentioned, we're totally complementary. She had lost both of her parents within a very short time. My parents are still alive. They have been married for 61 years. They're in various stages of health decline. So that's a daily reality for me. And I'm also that sandwich generation. So trying to take care of my parents and a 12-year-old daughter who I'm a solo parent of, no father in the picture. And my two adult kids are launched. So while Heidi and I come at it from totally different perspectives, I think that's kind of part of the power of our partnership. And I'm also super, I don't know, just cognizant after watching Heidi go through it of how mortal we all are. And, again, I'm a solo parent. So if I go, my stories go, my legacy goes. And so that's when we started joining forces and thinking about like, let's take this passion that we both feel and create this wonderful, empowering business to help people.
Well, thank you so much for your honesty. Part of what I do and what this community is about is sharing your stories. And, even though we are here talking about end of life planning and the business that you built, sharing your personal stories is really important. It helps me and hopefully the community to connect with both of you. We are all humans here trying to help each other. And that's really what this is about. And when you talk about the unexpected nature of death, nobody knows it more than the people in this community. But I also, when I went on your website just the other day, it says we all have plenty of time left until we don't. And that couldn't be more true. And so, talk to me about some of the research behind end of life planning and some of the trends that we're seeing and why it's so important to do what you guys are doing and for us to do what you teach us.
Yeah, I think when we first started this, we both were like, okay, like we think this is important, but is it important? So we started to do the research and it was so fascinating. Like one of the first things that we found was a 2024 survey that shows that actually 90% of people believe that discussing end of life planning with a loved one is important. So, yay for us. We believe this is important. However, the kicker is only 32% of Americans have end of life plans documented. And so while we think it's important, we aren't actually taking the action or taking the steps to document the plans. And even when we do document plans, it's usually more tactical. So it's things like having a will or a trust, the advanced healthcare directives, that kind of thing. That very rarely does it touch on any of the nostalgic or self care pieces that we know are important. And so we were kind of curious and we're like, well, why is that? Like, why is this such a big deal? And so we did find a study that actually said death and estate planning is the number two most difficult topic to discuss with family. So only second to sex and relationships. So we're like, okay, this is something that's very difficult. So how do we make it less difficult?
Yeah, honestly, like it's all about words mattering, right? We understand we're human. We want to do fun and light and engaging things. And we got to thinking that maybe it's about how we're framing it because people are talking about these heavy things like creating a will and a trust, but they're really not taking into consideration that storytelling piece, Jen, that you were just talking about, like the legacy piece, the nostalgia, the fun, the memories that we all have and we want to make sure get carried on. So, we probably need to normalize this end of life conversation, but reframe it in a way that empowers us. Because honestly, if you think about it, preparing for death is about celebrating our life, and the two are intrinsically tied. So let's reframe the conversation, and that's when we decided let's flip the script. Instead of calling it end of life planning, let's create something people can get excited about and want. And we all want closure. Closure is something we all crave. It's peaceful, it's empowering. And that's when we developed what we call a closure map, which entails 40 steps that have this balance of tactical, nostalgic, and self-care aspects. And so when you complete your closure map or start your closure map, it feels less about like this heavy, oh, this is going to be, really, it's going to weigh me down. It's fraught. And it's going to feel more like I want to tell my stories, but I also need to get the tactical stuff done and I need to care for myself in the process.
And what I really love about this is, that it's very humane, it's very human oriented. It is not, when I think of estate planning or end of life planning, there's a lot of words that I don't understand. There's a lot of concepts I don't understand. I'm not an attorney, I'm not a financial planner like you are. And so oftentimes people are throwing, these concepts at you and these language and these contracts and these wills and you're signing off on things that you have no idea what they really mean. And I love that you're able to take that down maybe, 10 levels to the human to human person, without all of that heavy content in it and make it super relatable. I know, I'm very open about my story, and in fact, I don't talk about this a lot, which you're right, really fits with your statistics that you have. Is that my husband and I did have a will, and we brought it to an estate attorney, or I brought it to an estate attorney after he died. And he looked at it and he looked at me and he goes, "This is terrible."
Oh,
And the
no.
reality was, we did it just to have it. We went to, somebody who could do the basic form of it. And we're like, great, check the box. And there was no thought put into it. And so the idea of actually being thoughtful about this process, like if Jack and I had done that, um, things could have been very different. And so thank you for creating this tool. And speaking of the closure map, how do you see it helping the people within this community, which, as you know, are widows?
Yeah, so I mean, first off, I think that the 40 steps, sometimes people hear that and they're like, oh, that sounds like a lot. And so the whole thing is completely customizable and people can start in the middle, they can start at the beginning, wherever. It's like there's not like a set, you have to get through all of them. It's really just trying to inspire people to get started. And one of the steps, which is actually the very last step, we call it the unique to you step. And for widows, I actually think that might be the best place to start by assembling something that we call your grief narrative. Because one of the things that I've seen as I've interacted with people who are grieving is sometimes it gets so overwhelming. Like I even remember I was at my dad's funeral, and so I'm processing my own loss. I'm dealing with all the logistics of the funeral, and his friends kept coming up to me and basically seeking comfort from me because they were grieving the loss of my dad. And so I think one of the most critical things we can do is to come up with our own grief narrative that basically says, I own my story. I get to say what I want to say about my experience losing my loved one. I get to say what I want to say about how I'm processing it. But rather than feeling like you're constantly having to do it on the fly, to actually document that narrative and to be able to own it in a way that empowers your own messaging, I think is super critical. And then the other thing, as Mikalee mentioned, is that, the perspective, once you've lost somebody, whether it's a family member, like a parent or a sibling, or your spouse, once you've had that experience of loss, your perspective changes. Like when I go and talk to people about what we do, if I'm talking to somebody who's in their 30s that has never lost anybody or gone through caregiving, they're just like, oh, it's so weird. Anytime you talk to somebody who's experienced a loss, they get it. They're like, oh man, I wish I would have done X, Y, or Z before. And so, really, what we now know is that for widows in particular, you are the keeper of the stories. So, you are the ones that will carry your family's legacy forward. So this closure map is such a critical tool. Number one, for you to help your loved ones not have to go through a scavenger hunt if you pass away, but also that you then can pass on those stories, traditions, memories in a way that carries your legacy forward.
And we do lean on tenets of positive psychology, but we definitely don't want people to think that this is a sugarcoating of end of life planning. Because I do think we hear that a lot in talking to people is that, there's death and there's heavy things. And we're not saying that your story isn't going to be heavy and weighty for you. And we're definitely not saying that, be grateful for all of it. But if we can, take sort of, again, that reframe, it's what we did with closure mapping as a concept, and go from a place of gratitude. We can all look around, even in the throes of devastation, and say, I'm grateful for this cup of coffee. Thank God for it. That one moment of gratitude and that reframe can kind of train your brain to look for the positivity. And so that's how we approach the closure map, is to try to give these prompts for people to remember the good things about their legacy, their stories that they want to carry on, and, to lean into that positivity. And one of those tools that we encourage through our workshops and through our training is humor, is to try to find the light and the funny and the relatable in your moments. I'm sure not one person watching this has ever not said the words, or I'm sure everyone has said, if I'm not laughing right now, I'm crying. And we've all felt that, right? And that's so true. So finding humor and joy and light in this process and really kind of weaving in that positive psychology, I think would be super important for widows and for everyone for that matter. Because again, we want it to be a positive frame. We don't want it to feel so heavy. But again, please don't ever look at it as toxic positivity, because if you start any sentence with, well, at least dot dot dot, that's going to be a toxically positive message, and we don't want you to do that. We don't have to be grateful for the hand we've been dealt, but we can be grateful for other things around us in any moment.
Absolutely. So much of what you just said resonated with me, and what you don't know, that has, just lit me up literally, is that as I build this community for widows to connect with each other, I'm also building a community of professionals and experts like yourself who are able to guide widows through this journey. And my first conversation that I had like this was with a man named Mark Carpenter, and he is a master storyteller. And to what you
Mhm.
were saying, Heidi, what we talked about is that, when you tell somebody you've lost your husband, people are nosy, and or just, they just don't know what to say. It's not even the nosy part. That's maybe a little rude. But, the first question is, well, what happened? And so we talked about that storytelling and how important that is. The second woman that I spoke to, her name is Dr. Peggy DeLong, and her whole thing is around gratitude and what you were just talking about, Mikalee. And in fact, her story is she had lost her husband very, very young. And what turned her onto this gratitude path was gratitude for a cup of coffee that she had in the hospital when she was visiting him. Spot on. And then, I mean, this gets crazier. The reason why this is so important is because I mean, community for me is everything. And so, how we're all working together to support this community. And the last thing I'll say is that Friday I'm having a conversation with a woman named Kelly Lynn, and she is a comedian. And she has
Oh,
turned
wow.
her whole grief story into a comedy act that
Yeah.
she performs and that she's written about. And so, yes, yes, yes to everything you just said. And the fact that you've been able to kind of encapsulate all of that in this incredible, not just product, but workshop that you do. It is just so valuable. And to that, I know that you have your closer map as a product, as a book, as a workbook, but I also know that you do workshops. And so, tell me a little bit about the workshops and then some of the feedback that you've heard in them.
So, yeah, the workshops are, basically walking the audience through a few of the steps, introducing them to the concepts of a closure map and that balance of tactical, nostalgic, and self-care. And then there's a huge storytelling component of it. And what's great is Heidi and I share basically how we're coming to this. So, of course, Heidi talks about the not knowing about the stories that she finds, the jewelry she finds in the safety deposit box. And I actually had this woman meet me in the hallway after our session. And she said, I'm so motivated right now. She said, I have 50 years of jewelry with my husband, that he's given me over the years, and it's in a safe. And she said, I know my kids have zero idea what any of these stories are. And she's like, I want to go home right now and just start writing them down. And I said, you can write them or you can just do a little video and just hold them up and show them. And she's like, oh my God, that's amazing. So, it's those moments where, as you just talked about, you get lit up, watching our audiences get lit up to document these things so that their stories aren't buried with them, right? That's important.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I had another one this past week. Actually, I just did a workshop. And so I met Jane, and Jane had been widowed for about a year. And so we were talking about this importance of the storytelling and documentation. And so she says, oh my gosh, this is so inspiring because what I find myself doing is, after I kind of processed my grief and I'm coming back into socializing with my family, my grandkids would come over to the house. And I found myself chasing them around the house, telling them all the stories about their grandfather. And so I was just like, did you know this trophy was from when your grandfather won this award? And oh, did you know that this tool was your grandfather's favorite tool? And she's like, rather than chasing them around telling stories, this is such a good motivator to get the important ones documented. So I love that.
Absolutely. I love that too. I mean, you just kind of answered the next question of what stories have stood out to you, but is there any other ones that you have been really impactful along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're so grateful for every story, every person who shares. And we had this one woman who, when you're facilitating these workshops, you can tell when somebody is just a bit skeptical of your premise. And she's sitting there, and we had talked, and at one point she gets up, you could just see her kind of build up the courage, and she raises her hand and she says, and we're talking about like the firsts and the favorites. There's a whole section we do on your firsts and your favorites. So we take, write down your first car, your favorite teacher, and then document some of that. And she raised her hand and she said, what if you have no positive memories? And I said, tell me more. And she said, I grew up in a very strict household. We didn't have warm holidays like you're describing. It was very strict and very cold. And she said, my mom made us clean all the time. And she said it was to the point where she'd take out the white glove and rub it against. And if there was a speck of dust, I'd get in trouble, and trouble wasn't good. And I just looked at her and I said, first of all, I'm so sorry that you went through that. But secondly, that's such a powerful story. And that is your story. And it shows you're here right now and you're resilient. You got through this. And honestly, even if it's not a happy story, it's your story and we need to document that. And you could see kind of okay, I can do that. And then someone else from the workshop who knows her was like, yeah, Cheryl, you're amazing. And it was just so nice to see the building on. And, so it's just moments like that where they're not there, but then they become there. And it's so wonderful to see them kind of leaning into that idea.
I really appreciate that because, I see that too in the communities and the groups that I lead where not everyone had a perfectly happy sunshine rainbow marriage.
Yep, for sure.
And that's part of the story too. And it's also part of the change that we can make. As we think through some of these things that were perhaps difficult for us, and if we have children or other family members that we can be really open and honest with the truth, perhaps there is a positive outcome at the other side of that because they're able to maybe change some behaviors or learn from those difficult memories. And so, I'm glad that brave woman raised her hand and shared that
Agreed.
for sure. And so, one of the exciting things that we have coming up, and I should have mentioned this right at the onset, and then reminded at the end, is that we have a workshop with Heidi and Mikalee coming up that will be on Hope Hub. And so we are inviting both members of Hope Hub and then members of the First 40 community as well. And so while the majority of the audience will likely be widows, it's really for anyone who wants to get a sampling, a taste of the work that Heidi and Mikalee do. I know that their workshops are generally much longer than in the hour that we will have together. But it'll give you a sense of what they do, and it'll also help you to start to think about, is this something that you want to participate? Do you want to work with Heidi and Mikalee in, some way to create your closure map? And so I'm really excited to have them back on the Hope Hub platform, and I hope that you will join us. And more information is available in the event section on Hope Hub. And then in addition, we will have more information that will be coming from them through their communities. And so thank you. It's definitely a jarring thought that happens to most widows, maybe not in the very beginning, but at some point within a few months where it's like, okay, well, what about, this maybe didn't go as well as I had hoped, or maybe it was beautiful. Maybe they had a really great plan. But now there's just me left. And especially if you have children, you've now just become a single parent, whether, you like it or not. And, you want to make sure that your children are protected.
Mhm.
And I know that's the case for many, many widows is that thought of, what if something happens to me? How do I make sure that they're taken care of, protected, not just financially, but like you said, through those storytelling elements, how do we carry, that legacy forward? And so I know that what you're doing is going to be really valuable for widows and is valuable for, pretty much everyone. Like you said, what was it? 90% of people think it's important to talk about estate planning, but they're just not doing it. And so, yes, it's an
Well,
incredibly important topic for
and
all of us.
it's so interesting too because just to keep going on the the
Yeah.
statistics train, like in addition to that, we know that statistically about 70% of widows change change financial advisors within a year of their
Mm.
spouse passing. So one of the things that we want to cover on April 9th when we come back is to really make sure that we give all widows and anyone that confidence to talk to the professionals. So we'll give questions that you can ask, things to be prepared for as you go into a conversation with an estate planning attorney, a financial advisor, a tax professional, because those can be really weighty and heavy and scary. Like you said, you don't understand the terminology. And so we're really excited to get it to the point where we give people that toolkit to say, I can go into this meeting, feel informed, feel confident, ask the questions I need to ask, and I get to choose who my person is. So that's going to be a really important piece of it. But then, of course, Mikalee's going to make sure we have some fun too. So,
We promise it
Uh,
will not be all financial tactical, but that will be a component because again, like the closure map is all about the balance. So that's how we'll approach our session on April 9th with some balance in mind. There will be humor. We'll get to make fun of Heidi a little bit, which is my favorite part. It's a very self-effacing humor story that you will never
you
forget.
guys, you didn't mention that you have been friends since
Oh,
how old?
first grade.
First
So
grade.
we
So
met in
I'm
the first
sure
grade.
that there's so much history that
Yeah.
you can bring into this conversation as
It
well.
definitely is woven in it's the undercurrent of all of our events and all of our writing. We have very much fun teasing each other. So I think we'll let your community in on that as well.
I love that. So, just a reminder so to join Hope Hub, if you aren't familiar with it already, if you're not a member already, please go to my website. It's lifey.com. There is a tab for Hope Hub, and there's a really easy button that says join the community. Once you're a member of the community, you have access to all kinds of things, including a recording of this video. Also, in the resource section, there is information about Heidi and Mikalee and how you can get in touch with them, and links to their websites and their incredible processes and um, you know, and oh my gosh, what's the word? Sessions that they do with people. And then, like I said, in the event section, you will see the event posted for April 9th, and you can click RSVP and join us then. So thank you so much for being a part of our Hope Hub community. It is truly my honor and my mission to be able to provide widows with the resources that they need, and what you provide is so incredible. I was gonna say the word special, and I was like, is that the right? But it is. It's really special
Mhm.
to be able to have, those stories, those memories, and everything captured in addition to all of the really, the harder parts too. And so that balance is special. It really is. So thank you again. And I will, what is today? February 11th. So just a little under 2 months, we will see you again back in Hope Hub.
We can't
Awesome.
wait.
Thanks so much, Jen.
Thank
Excited.
you.